I stood in the marble hallway of the Scottsdale Country Club, my hands trembling as I clutched my designer clutch, listening to my husband of 18 years tell his boss that I wasn't attractive enough to be seen at his company's most important event of the year. The emerald green dress I'd saved for months to buy suddenly felt like a costume, and the professional makeup that had taken 2 hours to perfect felt like war paint for a battle I didn't know I was fighting. What I heard next would unravel not just my marriage, but 18 years of financial manipulation disguised as love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lisa Ramirez, though for the past 18 years I've been Lisa Martinez, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that the man I'd been financially supporting was too ashamed to be seen with me in public. At 42, I thought I had my life figured out. I'm a certified public accountant with my own small practice in Phoenix, Arizona, specializing in helping local businesses navigate their finances during growth periods. I've always been the practical one, the steady hand, the woman who could make numbers dance and budgets balance. My office sits in a modest strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, built from 15 years of careful planning and client relationships based on trust and competence. I met Mark during our senior year at Arizona State University. He was studying business with dreams bigger than the desert sky, full of charm and ambition that seemed to sparkle in the Arizona sun. I was the accounting major who helped him pass his statistics class, the quiet girl who fell for his confidence and vision of our future together. He painted pictures of success where my stability would anchor his soaring aspirations, where my practical nature would ground his big dreams. It seemed like the perfect partnership, and for years, I believed it was. We married right after graduation, in a small ceremony at my parents' house in Tempe, with folding chairs in the backyard and my mother's homemade tres leches cake. Mark promised me adventures, success, and a life where we'd build something beautiful together. What I didn't realize was that I'd be the one doing most of the building, while he'd be the one taking credit for the architecture. The pattern started, small, as these things always do. When Mark got his first sales job at a medical device company, his credit wasn't quite good enough for the car lease he wanted. Nothing dramatic, just a few missed payments from college that were dragging down his score. I co-signed for a modest Honda Accord, telling myself it was an investment in our future. When he landed a position at a tech startup 2 years later, he needed a more impressive vehicle for client meetings. Again, my signature on the paperwork, my credit backing his ambitions. The Honda became a Lexus, then eventually the BMW that would become such a symbol of everything wrong with our relationship. Mark had a gift for making his needs seem reasonable, even necessary. When he wanted to join the Phoenix Athletic Club for networking, he explained how crucial it was for building relationships with potential clients. The $15,000 membership fee came from my carefully maintained emergency fund, money I'd been saving since my first job out of college. When he needed professional wardrobe upgrades, designer suits that cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months, somehow my credit card became the solution. Each expense was presented as an investment in our shared future, a stepping stone toward the success we'd both enjoy. I supported these decisions because I loved him, because I believed in the vision he painted of our life together. More than that, I was good at what I did, and my accounting practice was steadily growing. I could afford to invest in his career because mine was stable and profitable. What I failed to see was how systematically he was separating his public success from my private contribution. At company events, he'd mention his supportive wife in abstract terms, but somehow I was always too busy with work, or not feeling well, or handling some family obligation that prevented me from attending. The Henderson Tech Solutions opportunity came 3 years ago, and Mark presented it as the culmination of everything we'd been working toward. The company specialized in cloud infrastructure for mid-sized businesses, exactly the kind of growing market where Mark's sales skills could really shine. The position came with a significant base salary, commission potential, and the kind of corporate culture that valued relationship building and client entertainment. It was also the kind of environment where appearances mattered, where success was measured not just in numbers but in image and presentation. Mark's integration into Henderson Tech required what he called strategic investments. The company had an informal expectation that senior sales staff would join the Scottsdale Country Club, where many of their high-value clients spent their leisure time. Golf games closed more deals than conference rooms, Mark explained, and the relationships built over dinner at the club were worth more than any cold call. The membership required a $50,000 initiation fee, plus monthly dues that exceeded my mortgage payment. I liquidated half of my retirement account to make it happen, convincing myself that this was the final push we needed to reach the kind of financial security that would benefit us both. Around the same time, Mark decided his image needed upgrading to match his new position. The Lexus was traded for a BMW M5, sleek and expensive enough to impress clients, but subtle enough to avoid seeming ostentatious. His wardrobe expanded to include custom suits from a tailor in Scottsdale's Fashion Square, each one costing more than I'd ever spent on a single item of clothing. He joined a high-end gym, started getting his hair cut at a salon that charged more for a trim than I spent on groceries in a week, and developed expensive tastes in wine and restaurants that became necessary for entertaining clients. Through all of this, I remained in the background, the financial foundation that made his lifestyle possible, but never quite integrated into the world he was building. When Henderson Tech hosted events, Mark would attend alone, explaining that these were industry-focused gatherings where spouses would be bored by the technical discussions. When clients visited Phoenix, he'd take them to restaurants and experiences I'd never see, funded by credit cards that bore my name but supported his networking. I began to feel like a business partner rather than a wife, someone whose contribution was essential but whose presence was unnecessary. The annual Client Appreciation Gala was Henderson Tech's biggest event of the year, a formal affair held at the Scottsdale Country Club to celebrate their most important partnerships and announce major company developments. Mark had been working for 2 years to close a deal with Southwestern Manufacturing, a contract that would represent the largest sale in Henderson Tech's history and virtually guarantee his promotion to Vice President of Sales. He'd mentioned the event in passing, describing it as a critical networking opportunity where the company's leadership would be making important announcements about the future direction of the business. For weeks, I watched Mark prepare for this event with an intensity I'd never seen before. He had his suits pressed and tailored, invested in new cufflinks and a watch that cost more than some people's cars, and spent hours researching the backgrounds of executives who would be attending. This wasn't just another company party. This was his moment to cement his position as Henderson Tech's rising star. I wanted to be part of that moment, to finally see the world my financial support had helped him access. The decision to surprise him came gradually, building in my mind over several weeks as I watched him prepare. I'd never been to the country club despite paying for his membership. I'd never met his colleagues despite hearing their names for years. I'd never seen him in his professional element despite funding every aspect of that element's existence. The gala seemed like the perfect opportunity to finally bridge the gap between the life I was supporting and the life I was excluded from experiencing. I approached the surprise with the same methodical planning I brought to my accounting practice. The event was black tie, so I researched appropriate attire and found a stunning emerald green gown at Nordstrom, a designer piece that cost more than I'd ever spent on clothing, but seemed worthy of such an important occasion. I made appointments for hair and makeup at the same salon Mark used, wanting to ensure I'd fit seamlessly into the sophisticated environment he'd described. I even researched Henderson Tech's recent business developments and Southwestern Manufacturing's corporate history, preparing myself to contribute intelligently to conversations about industry trends and market opportunities. The dress fit perfectly, a floor-length silk creation that made me feel elegant and confident in ways I hadn't experienced in years. The emerald green complemented my dark hair and brown eyes, and the cut was sophisticated without being ostentatious. At the salon, they styled my hair in an elegant updo and applied makeup that enhanced my features while maintaining a professional, polished appearance. Looking in the mirror before leaving for the club, I felt beautiful and worthy of standing beside the successful man I'd helped create. The Scottsdale Country Club exceeded every expectation I'd harbored about the world Mark inhabited. The building itself was an architectural masterpiece, all soaring ceilings and elegant lighting, with panoramic views of the desert mountains that surrounded the valley. Luxury cars filled the valet area, and men in tuxedos escorted women in designer gowns through the elegant entrance. This was the environment my $50,000 investment had purchased access to, and seeing it finally felt like validation of the sacrifice that investment had represented. I gave my name at the registration desk, explaining that I was Mark Martinez's wife and had come to surprise him. The hostess checked her list with a confused expression, mentioning that Mr. Martinez had RSVP'd for one, but quickly recovered and welcomed me warmly to the event. She directed me toward the main ballroom, where cocktails were being served before the dinner and program. I felt a flutter of nervous excitement as I walked through the elegant corridors, anticipating Mark's surprise and delight at seeing me there. The ballroom was spectacular, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over round tables draped in crisp white linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the golf course and mountains beyond, while a small orchestra provided background music for the cocktail reception. Men and women in formal attire mingled throughout the space, their conversations creating a sophisticated buzz that spoke of important business being conducted in elegant surroundings. I spotted Mark almost immediately, standing near the bar, with a group of men I recognized from photos as Henderson Tech executives. He looked magnificent in his custom tuxedo, every inch the successful businessman he'd worked so hard to become. His confidence was evident in his posture and gestures as he engaged with his colleagues, and I felt a surge of pride watching him command attention in this sophisticated environment. This was the man I'd married, the ambitious dreamer who'd promised we'd build something beautiful together. Seeing him in his element made every financial sacrifice feel worthwhile. I was making my way across the ballroom toward his group when nature called, and I detoured toward the restrooms located just off the main corridor. The ladies' room was as elegant as everything else in the club, with marble countertops and soft lighting that made everyone look their best. I was touching up my lipstick when I heard familiar voices in the hallway outside. Mark was speaking with someone I recognized as his boss, David Henderson, the company's founder and CEO. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Their conversation drifted through the slightly open door as they stood in the hallway, apparently waiting for the men's room to become available. I heard David ask about spouses attending the event, mentioning that several other executives had brought their wives to such an important celebration. My heart quickened with anticipation, imagining Mark's excitement as he explained that his wife had surprised him by attending. Instead, I heard words that felt like physical blows. Mark's voice, casual and dismissive, explained that his wife wouldn't be attending because these events required a certain level of sophistication that not everyone possessed. He described me as better suited to staying home with Netflix than representing Henderson Tech to their most important clients. The phrase that shattered my heart was his casual comment about needing people who could represent the company's image appropriately, suggesting that my appearance and social skills weren't adequate for such prestigious gatherings. David laughed, approvingly, praising Mark's understanding of how important appearances were in their business. The conversation continued with Mark describing how he'd learned to manage these situations by being selective about when and where he included me in his professional life. They discussed the importance of maintaining certain standards when dealing with high-value clients, and Mark positioned my absence as evidence of his sophisticated understanding of business protocol. I stood frozen in the marble bathroom, my reflection in the elegant mirror showing a woman whose world had just collapsed around her. The emerald dress that had made me feel beautiful now seemed like a costume for a role I'd never been invited to play. The professional makeup felt like armor for a battle I'd already lost without knowing I was fighting. Every detail of my careful preparation for this surprise now felt like evidence of my own delusion about my place in Mark's life. The voices moved away as they entered the men's room, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that the man I'd been supporting financially for 18 years was too ashamed of my appearance to be seen with me in public. The country club membership I'd funded was being used to exclude me from the very world it was supposed to provide access to. The successful image I'd helped him create was built on my invisibility, my absence, my willingness to remain hidden, while he enjoyed the benefits of my sacrifice. I remained in the bathroom for several minutes, processing the full implications of what I'd overheard. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a misguided attempt to protect me from a boring business event. This was a calculated strategy Mark had developed for managing the perceived liability of his marriage, while maintaining access to the financial benefits I provided. He'd built his professional image on the foundation of my support while ensuring that foundation remained invisible to everyone who mattered in his career. When I finally left the bathroom, I moved through the elegant ballroom like a ghost at my own funeral. I could see Mark across the room, animated and charismatic as he worked the crowd, every inch the successful executive he'd become with my help. He had no idea I was there, no awareness that his carefully constructed world was about to experience a seismic shift. The confidence in his bearing, the ease with which he navigated these sophisticated surroundings, the obvious respect he commanded from his colleagues all felt like accusations now, evidence of how completely he'd erased my contribution to his success. I didn't approach him. I didn't create a scene or demand explanations that would only produce more lies. Instead, I walked quietly out of the ballroom, through the elegant corridors of the country club I'd paid to access, past the luxury cars in the valet area, and into the warm Arizona night that suddenly felt cold and unwelcoming. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts, my mind already beginning to process the implications of what I'd discovered. Back in our Scottsdale home, I sat in the kitchen I'd decorated and furnished, surrounded by the comfortable life I'd built and maintained, and began to see everything differently. The granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, the designer furniture and carefully chosen artwork, even the mortgage payments and utility bills all represented my contribution to a life that excluded me when it mattered most. I'd been cast in the role of silent partner in my own marriage, essential for financing the production, but forbidden from appearing in the final performance. Mark returned home after midnight, slightly drunk and exhilarated from his successful evening. He described the event in glowing terms, mentioning the important connections he'd made and the positive feedback he'd received from company leadership. He spoke about the announcement of his promotion to vice president of sales, the salary increase and expanded responsibilities that would come with the new position. Throughout his enthusiastic recap, there was no mention of missing me, no expression of regret that I hadn't been there to share in his triumph. I listened to his description of the evening with new understanding, hearing not just what he said, but what he carefully avoided saying. The success he was celebrating had been built on my financial foundation, but I was written out of the story entirely. The promotion he'd achieved was possible because of the image and lifestyle my support had made possible, but my contribution was invisible even in the privacy of our own home. I'd become a ghost in my own life, present in all the ways that required sacrifice, but absent from all the moments that offered reward. That night, as Mark slept beside me in the bed I'd helped purchase, in the house I'd helped buy, I began planning my response to 18 years of systematic exclusion and financial exploitation. The accountant in me started analyzing the numbers, tracing the flow of money and credit that had built Mark's successful image. the woman in me started imagining a different life, one where my worth wasn't measured by my willingness to remain invisible while funding someone else's dreams. The next morning brought clarity along with the Arizona sunrise streaming through our bedroom windows. Mark left for work early, energized by his promotion and the new responsibilities it would bring. He kissed me goodbye with the same casual affection he'd shown for years, apparently unconscious that anything had fundamentally changed between us. For him, the previous evening had been an unqualified success, confirmation that his strategy of excluding me from his professional life while maintaining access to my financial support was working perfectly. I called in sick to my own office and spent the day gathering documents and making careful notes about our financial entanglements. 18 years of joint accounts, co-signed loans, shared credit cards, and intermingled assets created a complex web that would require careful analysis to untangle. The country club membership, the BMW lease, the mortgage on our house, even Mark's expensive wardrobe and professional expenses were all tied to my credit and financial stability in ways that had seemed natural at the time, but now revealed themselves as systematic manipulation. The more I analyzed our financial situation, the clearer it became that Mark had constructed his entire lifestyle around my invisible support. His salary, while substantial, couldn't have maintained the image and expenses that had become essential to his professional success. The gap between his income and his lifestyle was filled by my financial contributions, my credit guarantees, and my willingness to liquidate my own assets for his career advancement. I'd been cast as the secret investor in a life that excluded me from enjoying the returns on my investment. Over the following weeks, I began reaching out to professionals who could help me understand my options and protect my interests. I consulted with a divorce attorney who specialized in cases involving complex financial entanglements and asset division. I met with a financial advisor who helped me understand the full scope of my credit obligations and develop strategies for protecting my financial independence. Most importantly, I began rebuilding my professional network and exploring opportunities that would allow me to rebuild my career and life on my own terms. The process of untangling 18 years of financial manipulation required patience, planning, and careful execution. Every shared account, every co-signed loan, every credit guarantee needed to be addressed in ways that would protect my interests while creating appropriate consequences for Mark's deception. I approached this challenge with the same methodical precision I brought to my accounting practice, analyzing every detail and developing strategies that would ensure justice while protecting my future. The transformation I was planning wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. Mark needed to understand the true cost of building his success on someone else's foundation while denying that foundation's existence. He needed to experience the consequences of treating his partner as an invisible resource rather than a valued equal. Most importantly, I needed to reclaim my worth and build a life that reflected my actual value rather than my willingness to remain hidden. The opportunity for action came sooner than I'd expected, presenting itself with the kind of perfect timing that felt like cosmic justice. The words echoed in my mind as I drove through the empty Phoenix streets at 2 a.m, my hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. She's not exactly the face you want representing Henderson Tech to premium clients. Each syllable felt like a knife twisting deeper into wounds I hadn't known existed. The emerald dress that had made me feel so elegant now clung to my skin, like evidence of my own foolishness, and the professional makeup I'd spent hours perfecting felt like war paint for a battle I'd lost before it even began. I pulled into our driveway and sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the house we'd bought together 5 years ago in one of Scottsdale's most desirable neighborhoods. The Spanish colonial architecture with its red tile roof and desert. Landscaping had seemed like such an achievement when we'd first walked through it with our realtor. Mark had been so excited about the prestige of the address, the way it would look to clients and colleagues when they visited. Now I realized that even our home had been chosen not for our happiness together, but for how it would enhance his professional image. The 2-car garage held his BMW and my modest Toyota Camry, a visual representation of how our priorities had diverged over the years without my conscious awareness. Inside the house, everything felt different now that I understood my true role in Mark's life. The living room, with its expensive leather furniture and carefully curated artwork, wasn't our shared sanctuary. It was a stage set designed to impress visitors who might advance Mark's career. The gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and professional-grade appliances wasn't where we cooked meals together. It was where I prepared food for dinner parties that showcased Mark's sophisticated lifestyle to his colleagues. Even our bedroom, with its king-size bed and luxury linens, felt like a space where I was tolerated rather than treasured. I changed out of the designer dress and hung it carefully in the walk-in closet that contained mostly Mark's expensive suits and my practical work clothes. The contrast was stark and telling. His side of the closet looked like a high-end men's store, with custom suits arranged by color and season, Italian leather shoes lined up in perfect rows, and accessories organized with military precision. My side contained the functional wardrobe of a working professional, quality pieces that would last for years but nothing that would turn heads or start conversations at sophisticated gatherings. That night, I lay awake listening to Mark's peaceful breathing and wondering how long he'd been living this double life. When had I transformed from his beloved wife into his secret shame? Was it gradual? A slow erosion of respect that happened so subtly I never noticed? Or had there been a specific moment when he decided that my value lay in what I could provide, rather than who I was? The questions multiplied in the darkness, each one opening new wounds in my understanding of our relationship. Sleep, finally, came near dawn, but it was fitful and filled with dreams where I stood on the periphery of elegant gatherings, always watching Mark shine while remaining invisible myself. I dreamed of boardrooms where my financial contributions were discussed in abstract terms, as if money materialized without a source. I dreamed of country club dinners where Mark explained my absence with casual dismissal, his colleagues nodding, in understanding that some things were better left unseen. Mark's alarm woke us both at 6:30, and he bounded out of bed with the energy of a man whose life was unfolding exactly as planned. He showered while humming softly, dressed in one of his custom suits, and prepared for another day of leveraging the success I'd helped create, while ensuring I remained hidden from its benefits. At breakfast, he chatted enthusiastically about his new responsibilities as vice president of sales, the expanded territory he'd be managing, and the increased client entertainment budget that would allow him to close even bigger deals. I listened to his excitement with new ears, hearing not just his joy, but the complete absence of gratitude for the foundation that had made his success possible. There was no acknowledgement of the $50,000 I'd invested in his country club membership, no recognition of the credit guarantees that had made his lifestyle affordable, no appreciation for the years of financial support that had allowed him to take risks and pursue opportunities. In Mark's narrative of his success, he was the sole author, creator, and beneficiary. When he left for work that morning, kissing me goodbye with the same casual affection he'd shown for years, I felt like I was watching a stranger perform a role he'd perfected through repetition. The man I'd married had either never existed or had been slowly replaced by someone who saw me as a resource to be managed rather than a partner to be cherished. Either way, the person sleeping beside me each night was not someone who valued my presence in his life beyond my ability to fund his ambitions. I called my office and rescheduled my appointments for the day, telling my assistant I was dealing with a family emergency that required immediate attention. It wasn't technically a lie. Discovering that your husband of 18 years considers you too ugly for public appearances certainly qualified as a family emergency. I needed time to process what I'd learned and begin formulating a response that would protect my interests while addressing the fundamental deception that had shaped our marriage. The first step was understanding exactly how extensive Mark's financial dependence on me had become over the years. I gathered every bank statement, credit card bill, loan document, and financial record I could find, spreading them across the dining room table like evidence in a case I was building against my own life. The pattern that emerged was both shocking and clarifying. Mark's lifestyle exceeded his income by approximately 60%, with the gap filled entirely by my financial contributions, credit guarantees, and asset liquidations. The country club membership was just the beginning. Over the past 3 years, I'd co-signed for his BMW lease, guaranteed a business credit card he used for client entertainment, provided the down payment for our house while he contributed only his portion of the monthly mortgage, and funded a complete wardrobe overhaul that had cost more than some people earned in a year. I'd also covered his contribution to his 401k during a period when he claimed cash flow problems, paid for a series of professional development courses that had enhanced his qualifications, and provided the seed money for networking events and industry conferences that had expanded his professional connections. In total, my direct financial contributions to Mark's career over the past 5 years exceeded $200,000, not including the ongoing monthly expenses and credit, guarantees that made his lifestyle sustainable. This money had come from my savings, my retirement accounts, and my excellent credit rating that allowed us to secure loans and financing that would have been impossible based on Mark's financial profile alone. I had essentially been funding his transformation into the kind of man who could afford to be ashamed of me. The irony was devastating and illuminating. The woman he considered too unsophisticated for his professional world was the same woman whose financial acumen and stability had made his professional success possible. The wife he hid from his colleagues was the person whose credit rating and assets underwrote his entire lifestyle. The spouse he dismissed as unsuitable for representing Henderson Tech was the accountant whose expertise had helped him navigate complex financial decisions and investment strategies throughout his career. As I analyzed the numbers, I began to see not just the extent of Mark's financial dependence, but the systematic way he'd hidden that dependence from everyone, including himself. He spoke about our house and our success as if the financial burden had been equally shared, when in reality, I'd carried the vast majority of the risk and expense. He presented himself to his colleagues as a self-made success story, when the truth was that he'd been subsidized by a partner he was ashamed to acknowledge. The more I understood about our financial arrangements, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about 18 years of systematic financial exploitation disguised as marriage. Mark had built his entire professional identity on resources I'd provided, while ensuring that I received no recognition, no social benefits, and no access to the world my investments had made possible. I'd been cast as the silent investor in a production where I wasn't allowed to attend the performances. That afternoon, I drove to my own office for the first time in 24 hours, needing the familiar environment of my accounting practice to ground myself in my professional identity. My modest suite in the strip mall might not have the prestige of Henderson Tech's glass tower, but it represented something Mark's success never could. Work I'd built entirely through my own efforts, relationships based on my actual value, and respect earned through competence rather than image. My assistant, Maria, noticed immediately that something was wrong. We'd worked together for 8 years, and she'd developed an intuitive understanding of my moods and energy levels. When I explained that I was dealing with some personal issues that might affect my schedule over the coming weeks, she offered to handle client communications and reschedule appointments as needed. Her genuine concern and practical support reminded me of what authentic professional relationships looked like. Relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than hidden agendas and secret shame. Sitting in my office, surrounded by the certificates and awards that represented my actual accomplishments, I began to remember who I was before I'd allowed Mark's ambitions to eclipse my own identity. I was Lisa Ramirez, a successful accountant who'd built a thriving practice through hard work and expertise. I was a woman who'd helped dozens of small businesses navigate financial challenges and achieve their goals. I was someone whose professional opinion was valued and whose presence was welcomed by clients who appreciated my knowledge and integrity. The contrast with my role in Mark's life couldn't have been more stark. At work, I was a trusted advisor. whose insights shaped important decisions. At home, I was a financial resource whose visibility was carefully managed to avoid embarrassment. My clients sought my presence at their most important business meetings. My husband hid my existence from his most important professional relationships. The woman who was indispensable to other people's success was considered a liability to the success she'd helped create. That evening, I began reaching out to professional contacts I'd neglected during the years when my focus had shifted toward supporting Mark's career. I called former colleagues who'd moved to larger firms, reconnected with clients who'd expressed interest in expanding our business relationship, and researched opportunities that might allow me to grow my practice beyond its current limitations. For too long, I'd thought small about my own potential while thinking big about Mark's possibilities. It was time to reverse that pattern. The phone calls were revelatory. Several former clients had been hoping I'd consider taking on larger accounts. But I'd always declined because Mark's needs took priority over expanding my practice. A former colleague at a major accounting firm mentioned that they'd been looking for someone with my small business expertise to head a new division focused on entrepreneurial clients. Another contact in the nonprofit sector described grant opportunities that would perfectly match my skills and interests. Projects I'd never pursued because they would have required travel that interfered with Mark's social calendar. Each conversation reminded me of possibilities I'd set aside to accommodate a marriage that was apparently accommodating me only as a hidden financial partner. I'd been so focused on supporting Mark's dreams that I'd forgotten I had dreams of my own professional aspirations that went beyond maintaining the status quo while funding someone else's advancement. The realization was both painful and liberating, a recognition of opportunities lost and possibilities that might still be recovered. Over the following days, I began documenting not just our financial arrangements, but the pattern of social and professional exclusion that had shaped our marriage. I made notes about the business events I'd been discouraged from attending, the professional relationships I'd been prevented from developing, and the ways Mark had systematically separated his public success from my private contributions. The evidence painted a picture of deliberate isolation, a strategy designed to maintain access to my resources while avoiding the social cost of acknowledging our partnership. I also began paying closer attention to how Mark spoke about me to others, listening for the subtle ways he diminished my role or explained my absence. When his mother called to discuss holiday plans, he mentioned that I was always too busy with work to travel, making my dedication to my practice sound like antisocial behavior rather than professional commitment. When a neighbor asked about joining us for a dinner party, Mark explained that I was not really the entertaining type, positioning my absence as personal preference rather than his deliberate exclusion. Each instance of erasure or diminishment felt like another piece of evidence in a case I was building against my own marriage. Mark had become expert at making my absence seem like my choice, my exclusion like my preference, my invisibility like my nature. He'd constructed a narrative where I was the antisocial, work-obsessed wife who preferred staying home to participating in his sophisticated professional life, when the truth was that I'd been systematically excluded from a world I'd helped him access. The psychological manipulation was as devastating as the financial exploitation. Mark had convinced not just his colleagues but apparently himself that I was unsuited for his professional environment, despite the fact that my education, accomplishments, and social skills were more than adequate for any business gathering. He'd created a story where my absence was evidence of my limitations rather than his prejudices, where my exclusion was logical rather than cruel. As the week progressed, I found myself watching Mark with new eyes, studying the man I'd lived with for 18 years as if seeing him clearly for the first time. His charm, which had initially attracted me, now seemed calculated and strategic. His confidence, which I'd admired, now appeared to be built on the systematic diminishment of my worth. His ambition, which I'd supported, now revealed itself as a hunger that consumed everything around it without acknowledgement or gratitude. The most painful realization was that Mark's deception wasn't limited to hiding me from his professional world. He'd also hidden his professional world from me in ways that prevented me from understanding my own exclusion. He'd described business, events as boring, technical gatherings where spouses would be out of place, when they were actually sophisticated social occasions where relationships were built and careers were advanced. He'd positioned my absence as protection from tedium, when it was actually protection of his image from contamination. I began to understand that Mark's shame about our marriage wasn't based on any objective assessment of my worth or suitability. It was based on his desire to present himself as a certain type of person, someone whose success was entirely self-generated and whose personal life reflected the same sophistication as his professional achievements. In this carefully constructed identity, a wife who worked in a strip mall rather than a glass tower, who drove a practical car rather than a luxury vehicle, who chose substance over style, represented a contradiction that needed to be managed, rather than celebrated. The week that had begun with such devastating revelation was ending with something approaching clarity. I understood now not just what Mark had done, but why he'd done it. Not just how he'd hidden me, but why my visibility threatened his carefully constructed image. This understanding didn't heal the wound of his betrayal, but it provided the foundation for a response that would address not just the financial manipulation, but the fundamental disrespect that had shaped our relationship for years. As I prepared for what would come next, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: a sense of my own power. For too long, I'd seen myself through Mark's eyes as someone whose value lay in what I could provide rather than who I was. Now I was beginning to remember that the woman who could fund someone else's success was certainly capable of creating her own. The accountant who could manage complex financial arrangements for others could certainly manage to protect her own interests. The professional who was valued by her clients could certainly find ways to be valued in her personal life. The question was no longer whether Mark's behavior was acceptable. It clearly wasn't. The question was what I intended to do about it, how I would respond to 18 years of systematic deception and financial exploitation. The answer was beginning to form in my mind, a plan that would address not just the money, but the fundamental lack of respect that had made the financial manipulation possible. Mark was about to learn that the woman he'd considered unsuitable for his sophisticated world was sophisticated enough to dismantle the foundation that had made his world possible. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp January air that makes Phoenix feel like paradise, and I woke with a strange sense of purpose that had been absent from my life for longer than I cared to admit. Mark had already left for his early morning workout at the exclusive fitness club downtown, another monthly expense that appeared on our joint credit card without discussion or justification. His routine had become so predictable over the years that I could map his schedule without checking his calendar. Gym at 6, coffee with potential clients at 8, office by 9:30, lunch meetings that stretched into the afternoon, networking events that often kept him out until well past midnight. I used his absence to conduct what I'd started thinking of as my financial archaeology, digging deeper into the layers of our shared economic life to understand how completely my resources had been redirected toward his image and advancement. The dining room table had become my command center, covered with statements, contracts, and documents that told the story of 18 years spent building someone else's dream, while my own aspirations gathered dust in forgotten corners of my consciousness. The evidence was overwhelming in its scope and systematic in its execution. Beyond the obvious expenses like the country club membership and luxury car lease, I discovered a web of smaller but significant costs that had slowly drained my resources over the years. Mark's monthly clothing allowance, which he'd described as necessary for maintaining professional appearance standards, exceeded what many families spent on groceries. His wine collection, justified as essential for entertaining clients, represented an investment that could have funded my retirement account for 3 years. Even his gym membership came with personal training sessions, massage therapy, and nutritional, consulting that cost more than my annual health insurance premiums. Each line item on our credit card statements revealed another way Mark had monetized his relationship with me, while maintaining the fiction that our financial partnership was equitable. Restaurant charges that I'd assumed were business dinners, with clients turned out to be lunch meetings with his personal trainer and barber. Hotel stays that he'd described as mandatory conference attendance were actually weekend getaways with colleagues who were building the kinds of personal relationships that advanced careers while I stayed home managing our household and my own business. The pattern extended beyond direct expenses to encompass opportunity costs that were harder to quantify, but equally significant in their impact on my financial future. While I'd been liquidating retirement accounts to fund Mark's networking activities, I'd been declining opportunities to expand my own practice because the time and travel requirements would have interfered with his social calendar. I'd turned down consulting contracts that would have enhanced my professional reputation because Mark needed me available for the dinner parties and client events that never quite seemed to materialize into invitations for both of us. I calculated that over the past 5 years alone, my direct subsidies of Mark's lifestyle had totaled nearly $300,000 when I included not just the money I'd spent, but the income I'd foregone to accommodate his schedule and priorities. This figure didn't account for the psychological cost of watching my own ambitions shrink to accommodate his expanding demands, or the social isolation that had resulted from being systematically excluded from the life my investments had made possible. The most devastating discovery came when I reviewed our tax returns for the past several years. Mark had been claiming deductions for business expenses that were actually personal luxuries funded by my income, reducing our overall tax burden, while shifting the financial benefit entirely to his professional advancement. He'd structured our finances so that his income appeared to support our lifestyle, while my contributions were categorized as investments in our shared future, creating a paper trail that obscured the true source of his success. I spent Tuesday morning meeting with a forensic accountant who specialized in untangling complex marital finances, a woman named Patricia Chen, who came highly recommended by the divorce attorney I'd consulted the previous week. Patricia's office, in downtown Phoenix, was everything Mark would have appreciated: sleek modern furniture, panoramic city views, and an atmosphere of expensive competence that spoke to successful clients and high-stakes cases. Patricia reviewed my documentation with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen every variation of financial manipulation possible within marriage. She asked pointed questions about timeline and decision-making processes, helping me understand how Mark's request for support had evolved from reasonable partnership to systematic exploitation. Her analysis confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Mark had deliberately structured our financial arrangements to maximize his benefit while minimizing his risk and legal obligation. The most shocking revelation came when Patricia explained how the legal structure of our assets actually protected Mark while exposing me to significant financial liability. The house was titled in both our names, but the mortgage and home equity line of credit were secured primarily by my income and credit rating. His BMW lease was guaranteed by my signature, meaning I was responsible for payments even if he defaulted. Even the country club membership, which existed solely for his professional benefit, was legally my financial obligation, under the terms we'd agreed to when I'd provided the initiation fee. Patricia's assessment was both professionally devastating and personally liberating. Mark had essentially used our marriage as a vehicle for transferring wealth from my accounts to his lifestyle, while maintaining legal protection for himself. If our marriage ended tomorrow, I would be responsible for debts incurred for his benefit, while he would retain access to assets we'd theoretically built together. The financial partnership I'd thought we shared was actually a one-way transfer system designed to benefit him while placing the burden and risk entirely on me. Armed with this professional analysis, I began developing what Patricia called an exit strategy that would protect my interests while unwinding the financial arrangements that had funded Mark's deception. The process would be complex and require careful timing, but it was entirely legal and ethically justified given the circumstances. I would be taking back control of my own resources rather than stealing anything that belonged to Mark, reclaiming my financial independence rather than seeking revenge. Wednesday brought an unexpected opportunity to test my new understanding of our relationship dynamics. Mark announced over breakfast that Henderson Tech was hosting another client appreciation event the following month, this one even more exclusive than the gala where I'd discovered his true feelings about our marriage. The event would be held at a private estate in Paradise Valley, limited to the company's most important clients and senior executives. Mark described it as the kind of gathering where careers were made and major deals were finalized, the type of sophisticated affair where image and connections mattered more than technical competence. As he spoke about the upcoming event, I watched his face for any sign that he might consider including me this time. Any indication that my discovery at the country club had prompted reflection about his treatment of our marriage. Instead, I saw the same casual dismissal that had characterized his approach to our relationship for years. He spoke about the event as if my attendance was unthinkable, a possibility so remote that it didn't warrant discussion or explanation. The conversation provided a perfect opportunity to begin implementing the first phase of my response plan. Instead of accepting his exclusion passively as I had for so many years, I expressed interest in attending the Paradise Valley event. I mentioned that I'd always wanted to see the inside of one of those historic estates, and that it might be nice to finally meet some of the colleagues he spoke about so frequently. Mark's reaction was immediate and telling. He didn't simply explain that spouses weren't invited or that the event would be boring for non-industry people. Instead, he launched into a detailed explanation of why my presence would be inappropriate, describing the sophisticated nature of the gathering and the importance of maintaining certain professional standards. He spoke about dress codes and social expectations, conversation topics and networking protocols, painting a picture of an environment where I would be out of place and potentially embarrassing. His response confirmed everything Patricia had, helped me understand about the psychological manipulation that accompanied the financial exploitation. Mark had constructed a narrative where my exclusion was logical and necessary, rather than arbitrary and cruel, where my absence protected both of us from the consequences of my inadequacy rather than his prejudice. He'd become so invested in this story that he seemed to believe it himself, genuinely convinced that hiding me was an act of kindness rather than cruelty. I listened to his explanation with what I hoped appeared to be understanding acceptance, nodding at appropriate moments, and thanking him for protecting me from an uncomfortable situation. Inside, I was documenting every word, every assumption, every casual dismissal that revealed how completely he'd rationalized his treatment of our marriage. This conversation would become part of the evidence I was building, not for any legal proceeding, but for my own clarity about the justice of what I was planning. Thursday morning brought a call from my attorney with news that accelerated my timeline considerably. The legal paperwork necessary to begin unwinding our financial arrangements was complete and ready for my signature. More importantly, she'd identified several strategies that would allow me to protect my assets immediately, rather than waiting for a lengthy divorce process to conclude. I could remove my guarantees from Mark's credit accounts, transfer jointly held assets to individual accounts, and restructure our mortgage arrangements to reflect the actual source of our payments. The conversation with my attorney crystallized something I'd been struggling with since the night of the gala: the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge would have involved deliberately harming Mark in ways that exceeded the damage he'd done to me. Justice involved allowing him to experience the natural consequences of building his lifestyle on someone else's foundation while denying that foundation's existence. I wasn't planning to destroy his career or damage his reputation. I was simply planning to stop subsidizing both. Friday afternoon, I drove to Henderson Tech's headquarters in North Scottsdale for the first time in the 3 years since Mark had started working there. The building was everything he'd described: gleaming glass and steel rising from perfectly manicured desert landscaping, a monument to success and sophistication that spoke to serious money and important business. The parking garage was filled, with luxury vehicles that represented the kind of lifestyle Mark aspired to maintain. Cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries, but somehow seemed modest in this environment of concentrated wealth and ambition. I'd dressed carefully for this visit, choosing a tailored business suit that projected competence and authority without appearing threatening or confrontational. My purpose wasn't to create a scene or embarrass Mark in front of his colleagues, but to begin establishing my own presence in his professional world. I wanted to be seen and remembered by people who had been told I didn't exist or didn't matter, to plant seeds of curiosity about the woman who had been systematically excluded from Mark's narrative of his success. The Henderson Tech lobby was designed to impress, with soaring ceilings and contemporary art that suggested both creativity and financial success. The receptionist greeted me with professional courtesy, and I explained that I was Mark Martinez's wife and wanted to surprise him by stopping by his office. Her expression shifted slightly when I introduced myself, a barely perceptible change that suggested she'd been told something about Mark's family situation that didn't align with my physical presence in their lobby. Mark's assistant, a young woman named Jennifer who had answered his phone for the past 2 years, seemed genuinely surprised to meet me in person. She'd spoken with me dozens of times when I'd called Mark's office, but her reaction suggested that she'd been led to believe I was someone quite different from the professional woman standing before her desk. Her confusion was polite but obvious, another piece of evidence that Mark's colleagues had been given a specific impression of his marriage that didn't match reality. When Jennifer announced my arrival, I could hear Mark's sharp intake of breath through the intercom system. His office door opened moments later, and he emerged with the kind of forced smile that suggested panic carefully controlled. He greeted me with superficial warmth, while his eyes conveyed alarm at this unexpected intrusion into his carefully managed professional environment. The contrast between his public persona and private anxiety was stark and telling. Mark's office was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture, university diplomas, and industry awards displayed with calculated precision to impress clients and colleagues. Photographs on his desk showed him with various business associates and company executives, but none included me despite 18 years of marriage. Even in his private workspace, I had been edited out of his life story, erased from the visual narrative that told visitors who he was and what he valued. The tour he gave me was perfunctory and clearly designed to minimize our interaction time while maintaining appearances for his colleagues. He introduced me to several people as his wife, but his body language and tone suggested discomfort rather than pride. Each introduction felt forced and strategic, as if he was checking items off a list rather than sharing genuine enthusiasm about my presence in his professional world. The most revealing moment came when we encountered David Henderson, himself in the hallway outside Mark's office. I recognized him immediately from the country club gala, the man who had laughed approvingly when Mark explained why I wouldn't be attending such sophisticated gatherings. His surprise at meeting me was genuine and unmistakable, confirming that Mark had created a specific impression of his marriage that didn't include the possibility of his wife being an articulate, professional woman capable of representing herself with competence and dignity. David's conversation with me was polite, but clearly exploratory, as if he was trying to reconcile the woman standing before him with whatever Mark had told him about his family situation. When I mentioned my accounting practice and some of the local businesses I'd helped grow over the years, his interest seemed genuinely engaged rather than merely courteous. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it was long enough to establish that I was someone worth knowing rather than someone worth hiding. After David excused himself to return to his office, Mark's anxiety became more apparent. He suggested that we continue our visit somewhere else, perhaps over lunch at a restaurant away from Henderson Tech. His eagerness to remove me from his workplace was obvious and hurtful, another confirmation that my presence in his professional environment was seen as a liability rather than an asset. The lunch conversation was stilted and uncomfortable, filled with Mark's attempts to understand why I'd visited his office without warning, and my careful responses that revealed nothing about my growing awareness of his deception. I spoke about wanting to see where he spent his days and meet the people who were so important to his career, positioning my visit as spontaneous affection rather than strategic reconnaissance. Throughout the meal, Mark tried to reestablish the narrative that had governed our relationship for so many years, explaining why future visits to his office would be inappropriate and potentially disruptive to his work responsibilities. He spoke about professional boundaries and workplace protocols, corporate cultures that discouraged personal visits, and industry standards that required certain types of separation between family and business relationships. I listened to his explanations with apparent understanding while mentally cataloging each excuse and rationalization. This conversation was providing valuable insight into how Mark justified his behavior to himself, how he'd constructed a worldview where excluding me was logical and necessary rather than cruel and manipulative. His ability to present discrimination as protection, isolation as preference, and exclusion as professional requirement revealed a level of self-deception that was both impressive and disturbing. The drive home was silent, except for the radio, playing softly in the background, both of us lost in thoughts that pointed toward very different conclusions about what had just occurred. Mark was probably congratulating himself on managing an unexpected crisis without significant damage to his professional image. I was processing the final confirmation that our marriage had become a performance designed to meet his needs while systematically denying mine. That evening, as Mark worked late at his home office preparing for a client presentation the following week, I sat in our kitchen making final notes about the financial and emotional architecture of our relationship. The woman who had once believed that love meant supporting your partner's dreams regardless of personal cost, now understood that real love required mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and authentic partnership rather than systematic exploitation disguised as matrimony. The plan I'd been developing over the past 2 weeks was nearly complete. A careful strategy that would address both the financial manipulation and emotional betrayal that had characterized our marriage for far too long. Mark was about to discover that the woman he'd considered unsuitable for his sophisticated professional world was sophisticated enough to dismantle the economic foundation that had made his professional success possible. The irony was almost poetic in its justice. The man who had built his image on my invisible support was about to learn what his image was worth without that support. The husband who had hidden his wife from his colleagues was about to discover what his colleagues thought of a man whose lifestyle collapsed when his secret funding source disappeared. The professional who had dismissed his partner's value was about to experience the full consequences of that dismissal. As I finalized my preparations for what would come next, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me like the cool desert air that made Phoenix evenings so beautiful. For 18 years, I'd measured my worth by Mark's success and happiness, defining myself through his achievements and aspirations, while my own dreams withered from neglect. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming not just my financial independence but my sense of self-worth, rebuilding my life on a foundation of authentic respect rather than hidden shame. The woman who had been too ugly for Mark's business parties was about to show him what real beauty looked like: the courage to demand respect, the strength to enforce boundaries, and the wisdom to choose dignity over the illusion of partnership. Mark's sophisticated world was about to become considerably less sophisticated and significantly more expensive than he'd ever imagined possible. The morning I decided to change everything arrived with the kind of brilliant Arizona sunshine that made the desert mountains look like they were painted against the sky. Mark had left early for what he described as a crucial breakfast meeting with potential investors, another networking opportunity that would advance his career while I remained invisible in the background of our shared life. His routine had become so predictable that I could choreograph his movements without consultation. Expensive coffee with influential people, strategic lunch meetings that stretched into the afternoon, evening events that required his presence but never mine. I used his absence to make the phone calls that would reshape both our futures, starting with Patricia Chen, the forensic accountant who had helped me understand the full scope of my financial entanglement with Mark's deceptions. Her voice was crisp and professional when she answered, already familiar with the case that had consumed my thoughts for the past month. We'd scheduled this conversation for precisely this time, knowing that Mark would be occupied with his investor breakfast and unable to monitor my activities or question unexpected phone calls. Patricia's analysis had been thorough and damning in its clarity. Over the past 5 years, my direct subsidies of Mark's lifestyle had exceeded $400,000 when all the hidden costs and opportunity expenses were calculated. This figure included not just the obvious expenditures like the country club membership and luxury car payments, but also the more subtle forms of financial support that had allowed Mark to maintain an image far beyond what his actual income could sustain. I had been unknowingly funding his transformation into the kind of man who could afford to be ashamed of the woman making his transformation possible. The legal paperwork was ready for my signature, documents that would immediately remove my financial guarantees from every account, loan, and credit arrangement that had supported Mark's professional image over the years. Patricia explained each form with meticulous precision, ensuring that I understood both the immediate consequences and long-term implications of withdrawing my economic support from Mark's carefully constructed lifestyle. The process was entirely legal and ethically justified, representing not revenge, but the natural consequences of building success on someone else's foundation while denying that foundation's existence. My signature on the first document felt like the moment when a dam finally breaks after years of mounting pressure, releasing forces that had been artificially constrained for far too long. Each subsequent signature felt lighter, as if I was signing away not just financial obligations, but the psychological burden of supporting someone who had systematically excluded me from enjoying the benefits of my own investments. By the time I'd completed the paperwork, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the profound relief that comes from finally acting in accordance with your own worth rather than someone else's expectations. The next call was to my attorney, confirming that the divorce papers were ready for filing and that the asset protection strategies we'd discussed were now implemented and legally binding. She explained that Mark would be served with papers at his office later that afternoon, a timing calculated to maximize the professional embarrassment that would accompany his personal crisis. The man who had been so concerned about maintaining appearances at sophisticated business gatherings was about to discover how his colleagues reacted when his personal life became the subject of office gossip and speculation. The third call was the most satisfying, a conversation with Rebecca Morrison, the senior partner at Southwestern Accounting Solutions, one of Phoenix's most prestigious financial consulting firms. Rebecca and I had maintained a professional relationship for years, occasionally collaborating on complex cases that required both her firm's resources and my specialized expertise with entrepreneurial clients. She'd been trying to recruit me for the past 3 years, offering partnership opportunities that I'd declined because Mark's social calendar and networking requirements made the travel and extended hours impossible. Rebecca's enthusiasm when I explained that my circumstances had changed was both gratifying and illuminating. She'd always wondered why someone with my reputation and client relationships had remained content with a small practice when I could have been building something much more significant and financially rewarding. Her offer was generous beyond my expectations. Immediate partnership in a specialized division focused on helping high-net-worth individuals and growing businesses navigate complex financial transitions, a salary that exceeded Mark's income by 60%, and equity participation that would provide long-term wealth-building opportunities. The position came with everything Mark claimed to value: prestige, sophisticated clients, an elegant office environment, and the kind of professional respect that opened doors to exclusive social circles. The irony was exquisite in its perfect justice. The woman he'd considered unsuitable for his business world was about to enter a more elevated version of that world, while his own position became increasingly precarious as the financial support that had made his success possible evaporated. I accepted Rebecca's offer during that same phone call, my voice steady and confident as I committed to starting my new position within 2 weeks. The timing was carefully calculated to coincide with the maximum disruption to Mark's life, ensuring that my own professional advancement would be established before he could attempt to interfere with or undermine my opportunities. By the time he understood what was happening, I would already be moving forward with my own career, while he struggled to maintain his without my hidden subsidies. The fourth call was to David Henderson himself, a conversation I'd been planning since meeting him in Mark's office the previous week. His surprise at hearing from me directly was evident, but not unwelcoming, and I explained that I wanted to discuss some business opportunities that might be of mutual interest. My new position at Southwestern Accounting Solutions involved working with technology companies experiencing rapid growth, exactly the kind of specialized expertise that Henderson Tech's client base frequently required. David's interest was immediate and genuine, particularly when I mentioned specific companies in their portfolio that I'd helped navigate successful expansion phases. The conversation evolved naturally from introduction to consultation, with David asking detailed questions about market trends and financial strategies that demonstrated both his business acumen and his growing respect for my professional expertise. By the end of our 20-minute discussion, he'd invited me to lunch the following week to explore potential collaboration opportunities between our firms. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. The wife that Mark had hidden from his boss because she wasn't suitable for representing Henderson Tech to premium clients was about to become a professional partner providing services to Henderson Tech's most valuable accounts. The woman whose presence at company events would allegedly damage Mark's career was about to have her own professional relationship with his employer, one based on her actual qualifications rather than her husband's insecurities. The final call of the morning was to Maria, my assistant, explaining that I would be transitioning the practice over the next 2 weeks as I moved to a new position. She'd been with me for 8 years and had earned both my trust and my gratitude for her loyalty and competence during years when Mark's demands had often required sudden schedule changes and priority adjustments. I offered her a generous severance package and a reference that would help her find a position that valued her skills appropriately. Another small act of justice in a day that seemed designed to restore proper proportions to relationships that had become distorted by years of accommodation and compromise. By noon, the infrastructure of Mark's lifestyle had been systematically dismantled through a series of phone calls and signatures that removed my financial support from every aspect of his professional image. His BMW lease would be terminated within 72 hours when the missed payment triggered the automatic repossession clause. His country club membership would be suspended by the end of the week when the monthly dues payment bounced. His expensive wardrobe, fitness club membership, and client entertainment budget would all become his personal responsibility, rather than shared obligations funded by my credit and income. The credit cards that had allowed him to maintain the appearance of success beyond his actual means were canceled effective immediately, leaving him with access only to accounts that reflected his true financial capacity. The business expenses that had been subsidized through my guarantees and co-signatures would now require his personal creditworthiness, a standard he hadn't met independently in over 5 years. The lifestyle that had seemed sustainable when supported by my hidden contributions would prove impossible to maintain when he was forced to fund it entirely through his own resources. I spent the afternoon packing my personal belongings and important documents, preparing for a move that represented more than just a change of address. The Phoenix apartment I'd leased was in a high-rise downtown, with city views and modern amenities that reflected my own taste rather than Mark's need to impress others. The space was smaller than our Scottsdale house, but infinitely more honest, a home chosen for my comfort and convenience rather than its impact on someone else's professional image. The items I chose to take were carefully selected to represent the life I was building rather than the one I was leaving behind. My diplomas and professional certifications, my favorite books and artwork, the jewelry I'd inherited from my grandmother, photographs that captured genuine moments rather than staged presentations of marital happiness. I left behind the expensive furniture and accessories that Mark had chosen for their impression on visitors, taking only the pieces that had personal meaning and authentic value. The most significant items I packed were the financial documents and records that told the true story of our marriage, evidence of 18 years spent building someone else's dream, while my own aspirations were systematically diminished and dismissed. These papers would serve not as weapons for future battles, but as reminders of lessons learned and boundaries established, insurance against ever again allowing someone to mistake my generosity for weakness or my love for unlimited availability. Mark returned home that evening in a state of controlled panic that was both satisfying and sad to witness. The divorce papers had been served at his office in front of several colleagues, creating exactly the kind of professional embarrassment he'd spent years trying to avoid. His assistant had fielded calls from the BMW dealership, the country club, and various creditors, all seeking immediate resolution of accounts that were suddenly in default due to my withdrawn guarantees. His first instinct was to attempt negotiation and damage control, approaching me with the same charm and reasoning that had convinced me to fund his ambitions for so many years. He spoke about temporary misunderstandings and communication failures, suggesting that we could resolve our differences through counseling and compromise. His tone was carefully modulated to convey both authority and affection, a performance designed to re-establish the dynamic that had allowed him to manage my perceptions and expectations so effectively in the past. I listened to his presentation with the detached interest of someone observing a fascinating but irrelevant performance, studying the techniques he'd perfected for manipulating my emotions and priorities. His arguments were skillfully constructed and delivered with apparent sincerity, but they no longer had the power to override my understanding of our relationship's actual dynamics. The woman who had once measured her worth by his approval now saw his approval as irrelevant to her sense of self-value. When Mark realized that charm and reasoning weren't producing the desired results, his approach shifted to barely controlled anger and accusations of selfishness and betrayal. He spoke about the years he'd worked to build our shared future, conveniently forgetting that the future had been built primarily with my resources while excluding me from its benefits. He described my actions as vindictive and destructive, positioning himself as the victim of my unreasonable expectations and sudden cruelty. The transformation from charm to anger was instructive in its revelation of how Mark actually viewed our relationship when his usual management techniques proved ineffective. His genuine emotions emerged when he could no longer maintain the performance of mutual partnership, showing me the contempt and entitlement that had always existed beneath his public affection. The man who had claimed to love me while hiding me from his professional world now revealed that his love had always been conditional on my willingness to remain invisible and financially supportive. His threats were empty but illuminating, attempts to leverage fears and dependencies that no longer existed now that I'd established my own professional independence and financial security. He spoke about his connections in the business community, his ability to damage my reputation and career prospects, his intention to make my life difficult if I didn't reconsider my decisions. Each threat only confirmed that I'd made the right choice in extracting myself from a relationship with someone who would use intimidation and manipulation when his preferred methods of control failed. The evening ended with Mark storming out of the house, presumably to stay with friends or colleagues who might provide temporary support, while he adjusted to the reality of funding his own lifestyle. His departure felt like the final confirmation that our marriage had been a performance he was no longer willing or able to maintain when it required genuine sacrifice and compromise from him rather than just from me. I spent that night in our house alone for the last time, walking through rooms that had been decorated to impress Mark's colleagues, but had never felt like authentic expressions of our shared taste or values. The expensive furniture and carefully curated artwork looked like props in a play that had finally ended. Impressive, but ultimately hollow representations of a life that had been built for other people's approval rather than personal satisfaction. The following morning brought news that accelerated the consequences of Mark's financial crisis beyond even my expectations. Rebecca Morrison called to inform me that Henderson Tech had reached out to Southwestern Accounting Solutions, seeking emergency financial consulting services to help one of their senior executives navigate a personal crisis that was affecting his professional performance. The executive in question was Mark, and the crisis was the collapse of his lifestyle and image following the withdrawal of his hidden financial support. The situation was unprecedented in its awkward complexity. Henderson Tech wanted to help. A valued employee managed personal financial difficulties that were threatening his ability to function effectively in his role. They were prepared to pay premium rates for discreet professional assistance that would resolve the crisis without creating additional professional embarrassment. What they didn't realize was that they were essentially asking me to clean up the mess created by my own decision to stop subsidizing Mark's deception. Rebecca's call was both a professional opportunity and a personal vindication that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. The company that had excluded me from social events because I wasn't suitable for representing their image to premium clients was now seeking my professional services to manage a crisis created by that same exclusion. The expertise that Mark had dismissed as irrelevant to his sophisticated business world was suddenly the solution his employer needed to preserve his position and their company's stability. I declined the engagement, explaining that a conflict of interest made it impossible for me to provide services related to this particular situation. Rebecca understood immediately, her laughter mixing amusement with admiration for the poetic justice of the circumstances. She mentioned that Henderson Tech had expressed interest in establishing an ongoing relationship with our firm for other financial consulting needs, opportunities that wouldn't involve the current crisis, but would provide significant revenue and professional satisfaction. The irony was so perfect it felt like cosmic justice delivered with mathematical precision. Mark's career would survive his financial crisis, but only because his employer found alternative solutions to the problems created by his deception. His professional relationships would continue, but they would be forever marked by the knowledge that his previous success had been built on hidden support that he'd been ashamed to acknowledge. The sophisticated image he'd worked so hard to create would be replaced by the reality of someone who'd needed rescue from self-created financial disaster. Within a month of that morning when I'd signed the papers that dismantled Mark's lifestyle, the consequences had rippled through every aspect of his professional and personal life in ways that were both predictable and surprisingly comprehensive. His BMW had been repossessed from the Henderson Tech parking garage, creating gossip and speculation among colleagues who'd assumed his success was entirely self-generated. His country club membership had been terminated, cutting him off from the networking opportunities he'd claimed were essential for maintaining client relationships. The most significant long-term consequence was the damage to his professional reputation within the tight-knit Phoenix business community. Word of his financial crisis had spread through the informal networks that connected executives and entrepreneurs, creating questions about his judgment and stability that would affect his career prospects for years to come. The man who had been so concerned about appearances had learned that financial disaster was far more damaging to professional image than having an unfashionable wife could ever have been. My own professional transformation exceeded even Rebecca's optimistic projections for my integration into Southwestern Accounting Solutions. Within 6 months, I was managing a client portfolio that included several Fortune 500 companies and numerous high-growth entrepreneurial ventures, work that was both financially rewarding and intellectually stimulating in ways my previous practice had never achieved. The partnership agreement included equity participation that would provide long-term wealth building far beyond anything Mark and I had ever discussed or planned together. The social opportunities that came with my new position were everything Mark had claimed to value but had never been willing to share with me. I attended industry conferences in major cities, participated in exclusive networking events, and developed professional relationships with executives and entrepreneurs who valued my expertise and welcomed my presence at sophisticated gatherings. The woman who had been too unsuitable for Mark's business parties was now hosting her own events, and being invited to occasions that exceeded his professional level by significant margins. The Phoenix business community proved to be more welcoming and inclusive than Mark's narrative had suggested, filled with successful professionals who valued competence over appearance and substance over image. My integration into higher levels of the local business hierarchy was smooth and natural, based on my actual qualifications rather than my willingness to remain invisible while supporting someone else's ambitions. The sophisticated world that Mark had claimed I couldn't navigate became my professional home within months of my decision to leave our marriage. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an invitation that represented the ultimate vindication of my decision. To demand respect rather than accept hidden shame, the Phoenix Business Journal was hosting their annual awards gala, recognizing outstanding achievement in various categories of professional excellence. Southwestern Accounting Solutions had been nominated for Financial Services Firm of the Year, largely based on the success of the division I now headed, and I was personally nominated for Executive of the Year in recognition of my rapid impact on the local business community. The gala was held at the same Paradise Valley estate where Henderson Tech had planned to host their exclusive client appreciation event, the sophisticated gathering that Mark had described as requiring certain professional standards that excluded me from attendance. The irony of attending this prestigious event as an honored guest rather than a hidden spouse was so perfect, it felt like a story designed to illustrate the power of self-respect and authentic achievement over artificial image and borrowed success. Mark was not in attendance at the awards gala, his current circumstances having reduced his professional profile to levels that didn't warrant invitations to the community's most exclusive business events. His position at Henderson Tech had survived his financial crisis, but his advancement opportunities had been permanently limited by the damage to his reputation and the loss of the lifestyle that had supported his networking activities. The career trajectory he'd sacrificed our marriage to protect had been irreparably altered by the consequences of that same sacrifice. The evening of the awards gala provided closure to a chapter of my life that had begun with love but had ended with the discovery of my own worth independent of someone else's approval or support. As I accepted recognition for achievements that were entirely my own, surrounded by colleagues who valued my presence rather than merely tolerating it, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from building success on authentic foundations rather than hidden compromises. The woman who had once driven through rainstorms to surprise an ungrateful husband had learned to create her own sunshine, building a life where her worth was recognized and celebrated rather than hidden and dismissed. The transformation from invisible support system to visible leader had required courage, planning, and the willingness to demand respect rather than settle for the illusion of partnership. Standing on the stage at the Paradise Valley estate, accepting applause from Phoenix's business elite for accomplishments that reflected my actual value rather than my willingness to remain hidden, I understood that real beauty had nothing to do with being suitable for someone else's image and everything to do with having the strength to create your own. Mark had taught me an invaluable lesson, though not the one he'd intended. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop accepting less than you deserve, even from someone you love. The desert sunset painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple as the evening concluded, and I drove home to my downtown apartment with a sense of completion that had been missing from my life for far too long. The city lights sparkled below my windows like promises of possibilities yet to be explored, and I fell asleep that night knowing that I'd finally learned the difference between being loved and being valued, between being supported and being seen, between having a partner and having a witness to your worth. The morning after the awards gala brought an unexpected phone call that would complete the transformation of my life in ways I could never have anticipated. I was still in my silk pajamas, sipping coffee on the balcony of my downtown Phoenix apartment while watching the sunrise paint the desert mountains in shades of rose and gold, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The caller identified herself as Amanda Sterling, the Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Financial Group, one of the most prestigious investment firms in the Southwest. Amanda's voice carried the kind of authority that comes from years of making, decisions that affect millions of dollars and hundreds of careers. But there was also warmth in her tone that suggested this wasn't merely a professional courtesy call. She explained that she'd been at the awards gala the previous evening and had been impressed not just by my acceptance speech, but by the conversations she'd overheard about my rapid rise in the Phoenix business community. Her research into my background had revealed a pattern of achievement and integrity that aligned perfectly with an opportunity she'd been developing for the past 6 months. Sterling Financial Group was launching a new division focused on providing comprehensive financial services to high-net-worth women who were navigating major life transitions. Amanda had recognized a significant gap in the market, where traditional financial services firms often failed to understand the unique challenges faced by women who were rebuilding their lives after divorce, career changes, or the loss of a spouse. She was looking for someone to head this division who combined exceptional financial expertise with personal understanding of the emotional and practical complexities involved in such transitions. The position Amanda was offering exceeded my wildest professional aspirations. She was proposing that I join Sterling Financial Group as Senior Vice President and Division Head, with full authority to build the new practice from the ground up. The compensation package included a base salary that was triple what I'd been earning at my previous practice, equity participation that would provide significant long-term wealth building, and a signing bonus that would immediately establish my financial independence beyond any possibility of future vulnerability. More importantly, the role would allow me to help other women navigate the kind of financial manipulation and hidden dependency that had characterized my own marriage. Amanda's market research had identified thousands of women in similar situations. Successful professionals who had unknowingly subsidized their partners' lifestyles while being systematically excluded from the benefits of their own investments. The new division would provide not just financial services, but education and empowerment for women who needed to understand their true economic position and options. The conversation with Amanda lasted nearly 2 hours, covering everything from my vision for the new division to the specific strategies we would implement to serve our target market. Her questions were probing and intelligent, demonstrating both her business acumen and her genuine commitment to creating something meaningful rather than just profitable. By the time we concluded the call, I had accepted her offer and agreed to start within a month, giving me time to transition my responsibilities at Southwestern Accounting Solutions while preparing for the most significant professional opportunity of my career. The irony of my new position was not lost on me as I began planning my transition. The woman who had been considered too unsuitable for her husband's business gatherings was about to become one of the most visible financial executives in the Southwest, with a platform that would require regular speaking engagements, media interviews, and high-profile networking events. The expertise that Mark had dismissed as irrelevant to his sophisticated business world would now be showcased as industry-leading innovation in financial services. My first week at Sterling Financial Group was a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and strategic planning sessions that reinforced my conviction that this opportunity represented more than just a career advancement. The company's culture was built on principles of integrity, competence, and mutual respect that stood in stark contrast to the hidden dynamics that had characterized my marriage. My colleagues welcomed my expertise and valued my contributions, creating an environment where professional growth was based on merit rather than the ability to remain invisible while supporting others. The new division's office space reflected both the prestige of Sterling Financial Group and my own vision for the services we would provide. Located on the top floor of a downtown Phoenix high-rise, the suite featured floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the valley and mountains, conference rooms equipped with the latest technology, and a library stocked with resources, specifically chosen to help women understand and navigate complex financial decisions. The environment was designed to be both impressive and welcoming, communicating competence and success, while ensuring that clients felt comfortable discussing sensitive personal and financial matters. My first major client consultation exemplified the kind of impact I hope to achieve through this new role. Margaret Thompson was a 62-year-old physician who had recently discovered that her husband of 35 years had been systematically draining their joint accounts to fund a secret gambling addiction. Like me, she had been unaware of the extent to which her financial security had been compromised by someone she trusted completely. Unlike me, she lacked the financial expertise to understand her options or protect her remaining assets from further exploitation. Margaret's situation was both heartbreaking and familiar, a variation on the theme of financial manipulation that had characterized my own marriage. Her husband had been skillful in his deception, maintaining the appearance of shared financial management while actually redirecting her income and savings toward his addiction. The discovery had come only when she'd received a call from their mortgage company about missed payments, leading to an investigation that revealed the full scope of the financial devastation. Working with Margaret required not just financial expertise, but emotional intelligence and empathy for the psychological trauma that accompanies the discovery of such fundamental betrayal. She needed to understand not just the numbers, but the options available to her, the legal protections she could implement, and the strategies that would allow her to rebuild her financial security while protecting herself from future manipulation. The process took several months, but the outcome was transformative for both her financial situation and her sense of personal empowerment. The success of Margaret's case, and several others like it, established the new division's reputation within the first 6 months of operation. Word spread through the professional networks of attorneys, therapists, and financial advisors who worked with women in similar situations, creating a steady stream of referrals and new clients. The division's growth exceeded even Amanda's optimistic projections, validating her vision of an underserved market that was ready for innovative financial services designed specifically for women navigating major life transitions. The most gratifying aspect of my new role was the opportunity to speak publicly about financial empowerment and independence for women. I was invited to address conferences, professional associations, and community organizations, sharing insights about the warning signs of financial manipulation and the strategies that could protect women from such exploitation. These speaking engagements allowed me to transform my personal experience into education and advocacy that could help other women avoid the kind of systematic deception I had endured. One of the most memorable speaking engagements was at the Arizona Women's Business Conference, an annual gathering of female entrepreneurs and executives from across the state. My presentation focused on the hidden financial dynamics that could undermine women's economic security, using case studies and examples to illustrate how intelligent, successful women could unknowingly subsidize their partners' lifestyles while being excluded from the benefits of their own investments. The response to my presentation was overwhelming, with dozens of women approaching me afterward to share their own stories of financial manipulation and hidden dependency. Many described situations remarkably similar to my own experience with Mark, where years of supporting their partner's career advancement had been accompanied by systematic exclusion from the social and professional benefits of that advancement. The conversations reinforced my understanding that my experience was not unique, but rather representative of a pattern that affected far more women than most people realized. The professional recognition that came with my new position extended beyond the financial services industry to encompass the broader Phoenix business community. I was invited to join the boards of several nonprofit organizations focused on women's economic empowerment, appointed to advisory committees for local business development initiatives, and featured in magazine articles about innovative financial services and female leadership in traditionally male-dominated industries. The most significant recognition came when I was selected to receive the Phoenix Business Journal's Entrepreneur of the Year award, acknowledging both the success of Sterling Financial Group's new division and my personal contribution to advancing women's financial literacy and independence. The award ceremony was held at the Arizona Biltmore, one of Phoenix's most prestigious venues, with an audience that included the most influential business leaders in the Southwest. As I stood on the stage accepting the award, I was struck by the complete transformation of my life over the past 2 years. The woman who had once been considered too unsuitable for her husband's business gatherings was now being celebrated as a leader and innovator in the business community. The expertise that had been dismissed as irrelevant to sophisticated professional environments was now recognized as industry-leading innovation that was changing how financial services were delivered to an underserved market. The speech I delivered that evening focused on the importance of recognizing and valuing women's contributions to economic success, both in business and in personal relationships. I spoke about the need for financial education and empowerment that would help women understand their true economic position and protect themselves from exploitation. The message resonated with the audience, many of whom approached me afterward to discuss their own experiences or to seek advice about situations they were facing in their personal or professional lives. The evening concluded with a reception, where I had the opportunity to connect with other award recipients and community leaders, building relationships that would enhance both my professional opportunities and my ability to advocate for women's financial empowerment. The conversations were substantive and engaging, focused on shared goals and mutual respect, rather than the kind of superficial networking that had characterized Mark's professional interactions. As I drove home from the Biltmore that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The discovery of Mark's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the catalyst for discovering my own strength and potential. The financial manipulation that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth had ultimately led to a deeper understanding of my value and capabilities. The exclusion from Mark's professional world had opened doors to opportunities that exceeded anything I could have imagined while I was focused on supporting his ambitions. The transformation was not just professional, but deeply personal. I had learned to define my worth by my own achievements, rather than by someone else's approval or success. The confidence that came from building success on authentic foundations, rather than hidden compromises, had changed not just my career trajectory, but my entire approach to relationships and life decisions. I no longer measured my value by my willingness to remain invisible while supporting others, but by my ability to create meaningful impact through my own efforts and expertise. The most unexpected development came 6 months later, when I received a call from David Henderson requesting a meeting to discuss potential business opportunities. Henderson Tech had continued to grow and was now seeking comprehensive financial services for their executive team and key clients. David's call was entirely professional, but I could hear the respect in his voice that had been absent during my brief interactions with him during my marriage to Mark. The meeting took place at Sterling Financial Group's offices, with David clearly impressed by the environment and the success of the division I had built. Our conversation covered a range of potential services, from executive financial planning to comprehensive wealth management for Henderson Tech's most important clients. The discussion was substantive and engaging, based on mutual respect and shared professional goals rather than the awkward dynamics that had characterized our previous interactions. During the meeting, David mentioned that Henderson Tech had made significant changes to their corporate culture over the past year, implementing policies that encouraged greater inclusion of employees' families in company events and professional development opportunities. The changes had been prompted by feedback from staff members who felt that the previous culture had been unnecessarily exclusive and potentially discriminatory. While he didn't mention Mark specifically, I understood that my former husband's situation had likely contributed to this organizational reflection and reform. The business relationship that developed between Sterling Financial Group and Henderson Tech was both professionally satisfying and personally vindicating. The company that had once excluded me from their social events because I wasn't suitable for representing their image to premium clients was now paying premium rates for my professional services and expertise. The transformation from excluded spouse to valued business partner represented a complete reversal of the dynamics that had characterized my relationship with Mark's professional world. Mark's own situation had stabilized somewhat over the past year, though at a significantly reduced level from the lifestyle he had enjoyed during our marriage. He had managed to avoid complete financial collapse through aggressive cost-cutting. and the support of friends and colleagues who had helped him navigate the crisis. His position at Henderson Tech remained secure, but his advancement opportunities had been limited by the damage to his professional reputation and the loss of the networking capabilities that had been funded by my hidden subsidies. The most significant change in Mark's circumstances was his apparent recognition that his treatment of our marriage had been both morally wrong and strategically destructive. Through mutual acquaintances, I had learned that he had spoken publicly about his regret over his behavior and his new understanding of how his actions had damaged both our relationship and his own long-term interests. While this recognition came too late to repair our marriage, it represented a level of self-awareness that had been entirely absent during our years together. The personal healing that accompanied my professional success was perhaps the most valuable outcome of the entire experience. The discovery of Mark's betrayal had initially shattered my confidence and sense of self-worth, but the process of rebuilding my life on authentic foundations had ultimately strengthened both my professional capabilities and my personal resilience. I had learned that real security came not from depending on someone else's success, but from building my own, not from being valued by others, but from recognizing my own worth. The relationships I developed during this period of transformation were based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than the kind of hidden dependency that had characterized my marriage. The friendships I built with colleagues and clients were authentic and supportive, providing the kind of emotional nourishment that had been missing from my life during the years when my primary relationship was based on financial utility rather than genuine partnership. The most meaningful relationship that developed during this period was with Amanda Sterling herself, whose mentorship and support had been instrumental in my professional success. Amanda became not just a business partner, but a friend and advisor whose wisdom and experience helped me navigate the challenges of leadership and entrepreneurship. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared commitment to advancing women's economic empowerment, providing the kind of authentic partnership that I had thought I had with Mark, but had never actually experienced. 2 years after my divorce from Mark was finalized, I received an invitation that represented the ultimate validation of my transformation. The Phoenix Chamber of Commerce had selected me to deliver the keynote address at their annual Business Excellence Awards, speaking to an audience of over 500 business leaders about innovation in financial services and the importance of recognizing untapped potential in the business community. The invitation was particularly meaningful because the event was being held at the same Scottsdale Country Club where I had first discovered Mark's betrayal. The venue that had once represented my exclusion and shame would now host my recognition as a leader and innovator in the business community. The symmetry was perfect, a complete reversal of the circumstances that had initially devastated me, but had ultimately led to my greatest professional achievements. The keynote address I delivered that evening focused on the importance of authentic leadership and the dangers of building success on hidden foundations. I spoke about the need for business leaders to recognize and value all contributions to their success, whether from employees, partners, or family members. The message resonated with the audience, many of whom approached me afterward to discuss their own experiences with leadership challenges and organizational culture issues. The speech concluded with a call to action for business leaders to examine their own practices and ensure that their success was built on ethical foundations that honored all stakeholders. I challenged the audience to consider whether their achievements were sustainable and authentic, or whether they were dependent on hidden subsidies and unacknowledged contributions from others. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with several attendees expressing their intention to implement changes in their own organizations based on the principles I had outlined. As I left the country club that evening, I felt a profound sense of completion and transformation. The woman who had once been excluded from this venue because she wasn't suitable for sophisticated business gatherings had returned as the featured speaker, honored for her contributions to the business community and her leadership in advancing women's economic empowerment. The journey from hidden spouse to recognized leader had been difficult and sometimes painful, but it had ultimately led to a life of greater authenticity, purpose, and satisfaction than I had ever experienced during my marriage. The 3 years that followed continued to bring new opportunities and recognition, with the division I had built at Sterling Financial Group becoming a model for similar initiatives at financial services firms across the country. My expertise in helping women navigate financial transitions became nationally recognized, leading to consulting opportunities, book deals, and speaking engagements that extended far beyond the Phoenix business community. The most rewarding aspect of my continued success was the opportunity to help other women avoid the kind of financial manipulation and hidden dependency that had characterized my own marriage. Through my work, I was able to provide education, advocacy, and direct services that empowered women to understand their economic position and protect themselves from exploitation. Each client success story represented not just a professional achievement, but a personal victory over the forces that had once threatened to diminish my own worth and potential. The transformation from excluded spouse to recognized leader had taught me that real beauty and worth come not from being acceptable to others, but from recognizing and asserting your own value. The woman who had once been told she was too ugly for her husband's business parties had learned that true sophistication lies in building success on authentic foundations rather than hidden compromises. The journey had been difficult, but it had ultimately led to a life of greater purpose, prosperity, and personal satisfaction than I had ever thought possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.